And welcome back. As I told you before, in the last hour or so, Barack Obama has participated in an online conversation. We'll have his words. And before the day started, I thought those would be the most jarring in terms of a comparison to our sitting president. But a statement has just come across from an unlikely source that is really unbelievable in terms of the context. James Mattis, yes, that James Mattis, he, not too long ago of the Trump administration, decorated general who the president couldn't say too many good things about when he first joined the administration before he was then shown the door. I want to read a portion of what he says, and Andrew's going to come in a second with even more context. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime, says General Mattis, who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership. Andrew, stunning for the highest ranking military official to populate a cabinet where the general said, where the president said, you know, he's the general of all generals here for me. He went even further than saying the president is not only trying to rip the country apart and he's the least mature president in our lifetime. He made some unbelievable connotations.
Mattis said, first of all, he condemns lawbreakers, but he saluted the protesters, saying that they are defined by tens of thousands of people of conscience who are insisting that we live up to our values as people and our values as a nation. We must reject and hold accountable those in office who would make a mockery of our Constitution. And he went on to say this: instructions given by the military departments to our troops before the Normandy invasion reminded soldiers that the Nazi slogan for destroying us was divide and conquer. Mattis writes, our American answer is, in union there is strength. We must summon that unity to surmount this crisis, confident that we are better than our politics. He basically just equated our politics.
Yeah. My God. Again, that was General Mattis, who about 4 years ago was brought to the stage at the Republican National Convention as the president's arguably greatest endorser of who he was. Now, he's making the connotation that our president is basically the least equipped commander-in-chief we've had in our lifetime, and that he is dividing this country, not bringing it together at a moment of crisis, and reminding the message to the troops about what our enemy in World War II, the Nazis, stood for, which was divide and conquer. And he says that is not who America is. You really don't have to read between the lines. Now, earlier this afternoon, and I wish I had that statement before I spoke to him, but nonetheless, very interesting perspective on this. There is a ABC News consultant, John Cohen, and he is the former acting undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security. Listen to what he said about the moment in time that we're in. John, let me take you back to Monday, and we've been talking for the better part of this week about that surreal situation that unfolded at Lafayette Park and the president before it. When you heard the language of the president talking about dominating and inflicting vicious dogs or ominous weapons and much more, and then the scene that played out, and who was flanking the president at that event and the subsequent moments, as a guy who spent more than 34 years in law enforcement, including ending at the top level at Homeland Security, did you recognize anything like that ever before in your career? And did you, like many of us, did you wonder, how is this happening in America?
Yeah, I found the comments troubling, and I also found the actions of the law enforcement and military personnel in clearing the peaceful protesters at Lafayette Park extraordinarily concerning. You know, during a situation such as this, when you have individuals who are exercising constitutionally protected rights to assembly and free speech, and they're engaged in exercising those rights in a peaceful manner, the ultimate goal for law enforcement is to allow them to exercise those rights in a manner that's safe for the protesters and the public, and also stand ready to deal with any outbreaks of violence. So it's the responsibility of government leaders not to exacerbate the situation, either through their comments or by taking overly aggressive actions. And I think on both counts, both through the rhetoric of the White House and through the actions of the law enforcement officers in the park that day, they failed on both counts.
We shared with our audience James Miller's resignation letter. We also showed Secretary Esper now clarifying what he thought was going to be going on Monday versus what he did. But from your perspective, the fact that the president was flanked by the Attorney General, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in uniform, who was there on the stage, I fully understand the need to maintain law and order. Thankfully, last night was a better night for America than some of the lawlessness we had seen in the early morning hours and the nights preceding. But the fact that there is so much apparently reported division from DOD and so many other departments here, how much does that concern you that there doesn't seem to be a common goal and a coherent message coming from the White House?
It's deeply concerning. I mean, look, in an emergency situation such as this, we're confronting protests in every state. A number of them have become violent. We have individuals who are using these protests to pursue their extremist agendas. We have criminals who are engaging in looting and other violent behavior. We have destructive and violent activity occurring in cities across the country. So this is, in some respects, a series of local issues, but it's also a national crisis. And during a national crisis, you need an organized plan, you need a coherent message, you need cohesive efforts involving federal, state, local authorities, and you need to send a message of calm and consistency to the public. When the public starts hearing inconsistent messages coming from our national leaders, or a message one day and a different message the next, it causes panic, it causes concern. We saw that during the response to the pandemic when we were getting inconsistent messages from our national leadership, and now we're seeing it during this crisis. So, if I were back in my old job, and again, I've worked for Republicans and Democrats, I don't look at this in a political way whatsoever. But if I were back in my old position, where I would be trying to focus our national efforts is making sure state and local authorities are working closely with federal law enforcement agencies and National Guard troops on the ground, making sure that there is a comprehensive incident command system set up, make sure there is a plan that everybody is aware of, make sure that intelligence and information about those who are seeking to use these protests as a way to either advocate for their extremist beliefs or engage in violent behavior, make sure that intelligence is being shared as broadly as possible, and send a message of calm and a coherent message that we are working to solve these issues to the public. Anything less than that, then our government is not doing its job.
You mentioned your career before you served in Washington. You were an officer yourself, and I'm curious, and God knows, abuse, police abuse had long preceded this president, this administration, but early on, the president jokingly in front of police said, rough them up a little bit when you put these guys in the squad car. There's also been no efforts from DOJ to do any investigations in the 3+ years. What is it? Is it training, John? Is it what needs to happen so this isn't just a bad couple weeks in American history, but an opportunity that real tangible change can happen here, so that at least law enforcement knows, A, this isn't accepted, and B, this isn't something that any of us want to have happen again. What practically can come out of this opportunity so it's not a wasted chance?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, you're right. I was a police officer. I've arrested a lot of people, and some of those arrests included, a violent confrontation and the use of force. And I think part of the answer to this is the culture within police organizations. Being a police officer is a tough job. You have to make very quick decisions about that could lead to the escalation of an individual interaction with somebody. You also have to understand that you're there to serve the public. You're there to protect the public. You can't view people in the community as an enemy. And the police department really has to operate under a culture that truly understands that their ultimate responsibility is to serve and protect the public. At the same time, we've systematically, over the last 3 years, dismantled or stepped away from a number of the national initiatives that law enforcement leaders around the country were calling for to help deal with institutional bias that may exist in some organizations, to address training requirements, to advance efforts like community-oriented policing, to provide Justice Department support for those departments that demonstrate a pattern and practice of discriminatory behavior. So the short answer to your question is we have to work at the local level to improve training, change the culture within law enforcement agencies that have problematic behavior by its officers. And on the national level, we have to go back to making it a priority to ensure that law enforcement agencies are carrying out their critical mission in a way that's objective, fair, and based on the Constitution.
John Cohen, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Nice to be with you.
All right, everyone. We're going to hear from another president from not many years ago, but obviously from a very, very different position approaching the last week in America. Barack Obama. He speaks about race in this country. We're going to show you part of what he had to say just an hour or so ago. We'll have it for you after this break.